All right, it's 9 o'clock. Let's get ready to get started here. And so we got a couple of presentations on submerged aquatic vegetation this morning. And I think, is it Joel Forte? Is that who's starting it? Is that who's starting it, Jesse? Joel?
Charlie Deaton will be the one actually coming up and introducing them.
Okay, all right.
Can y'all hear me okay? There it is. So thanks for your continued interest in discussing improved protection for our submerged aquatic vegetation habitats. Today you'll be getting a couple presentations from UNC's Institute of Marine Sciences, talking about the importance of our SAV ecosystems and the economic importance that they provide to the state. I'll do the quick version of how we got here, which is this all started with the most recent amendment to the shrimp FNP. As part of that, staff developed area closure proposals, closures to trawling, to protect SAV habitat, and that didn't go over so well. So after a lot of negative input from the public, you instructed staff to come back with proposals that protect SAV in a more comprehensive manner. So far, you've received a couple presentations from staff on how DMF staff currently approach SAV protection. The first in August being on the CHIP and how multiple commissions manage SAV protections. And then in November, you heard from Kim Harding on our environmental permit review program, where we try to reduce impacts through the permitting process. So today, the two presentations you'll be hearing, the first is from Dr. Joel Fodry, who's the director of UNC's Institute of Marine Sciences and professor of estuarine ecology. And he'll be presenting on our state's seagrass beds, the fish that use them, and providing some context about what makes them special in a global setting. And second, you'll be hearing from Madeline Payne, who's a graduate student in Dr. Fodry's research group. And she'll be presenting on some of her research on the economic value of fisheries production from our seagrass beds. And for Madeline's presentation, I just want to note that it's a completely separate work from the economic analysis work that you heard from Jason yesterday. And before I turn it over, I'm just going to give a quick indication of our future direction here for y'all to be thinking about, which is that DMF staff have started to look at how wide our regulatory framework can go here in terms of coming up with some more holistic SAV protections. And through the CHIP, we're going to start to throw out a couple ideas that might fit into that extent, and we'll be coming back to you and the Habitat and Water Quality Advisory Committee soon with a few potential options to get your thoughts on, and those that might have some traction will start to develop through the CHIP. And we are entering the 2026 CHIP update cycle, so you will be hearing from me and DMF's other habitat protection staff quite a bit over the next 18 months about SAV and other habitats. So with that, I will turn it over to Joel.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting us come talk about seagrass. I get very excited about it. I do enjoy the seagrass. I grew up right here in Beaufort, and so spent my childhood like out there in the water, sort of enjoying the seagrass, but not really knowing just how good of a resource it was. So hopefully we can chat about it a bit today, and maybe you'll come away with a better appreciation of just what it's doing for us to some degree. Maybe you already know. This photo on top, I'm the world's worst photographer. And this photo on top I took with my iPhone back in like 2010. We were doing an experiment with clams and seagrass, and I just took a little iPhone shot. And then Ann Deaton, who used to be at DMF, she saw that and she wanted it. And actually DMF had these magnets made for a while with this exact image. This is the best photo I've ever taken in my life. And then on the bottom, these are seagrass seeds. So this is a flowering plant. One of the plants out there is a flowering plant. It produces seeds, and I'm going to come back to that at the end of this. I appreciate Ryan wearing the Carolina shirt. I'm a Carolina grad myself, a proud Tar Heel. And And of course, the Institute, which sits right beside DMF's main office, the Institute has existed for 80 years. We were originally the Institute of Fisheries Research. We were the Fisheries Institute until the late 60s. So lately, I've been going back through all the old newspaper clippings that the Institute used to collect. If anybody wants to see old newspaper clippings about fisheries from the 40s, 50s, 60s, come on by, come visit us. We've got a couple of these albums, lots of these albums that they collected. It's been fascinating just sort of looking through all sorts of gold nuggets. But I am sort of advertised for IMS. You know, I think we do 4 things really well, or we try to do to serve the state. Our mission is to serve the state. Of course, we do natural resource management type things and science. We also do a lot of water quality. That may be our strongest wing right there is people like Hans Pearl or Rachel Noble doing water quality. Coastal hazards and resilience, like storm, flooding, planning for that. And then kind of, you know, linking all those as ecosystem processes, which I'm going to talk about. And then Madeline will do a better job of actually talking about like resource economics. And then of course, at the middle of all that's people. And with the new interstate, I'm thinking more about how the people are going to be interacting with the resources in our part of the world. Okay, so our lab does work in the true seagrasses. I am shockingly ignorant when it comes to other forms of SAV. Be aware there are multiple types of SAVs. There's brackish water SAVs, and then what our lab does is more the high salinity true seagrasses. And those true seagrasses are things like eelgrass, and that's the plant that seeds here, shoalgrass, and then widgeon grass. And I'm guessing all of you know something about these, or a lot perhaps. We're at the sort of biogeographic break, so we're at the very southern end of where you can find eelgrass, and we're at the northern end of where you can find shoalgrass. And then the widgeon grass is just a very weedy species that pops up kind of all over. It can be really thick for a while and then go away and then come back and go away. And these are all pictures from right around here, but the seagrass is just such a great place to go do research because it comes in all shapes and sizes. These photos are a little bled out, but I mean, we have big contiguous meadows, we've got small contiguous meadows, we've got big patchy meadows, we've got small patchy meadows. We've got seagrass that's next to oyster reefs, we've got seagrass that's next to marshes, and then sometimes it's not. And so our lab does spend a lot of time trying to figure out, does any of that matter? You know, is all seagrass seagrass? Or do we want all our seagrass to be next to a marsh, because that's where we get the most, you know, benefit? Do we want it to be far away from a marsh? This patchiness thing I'm going to come back to at the end. Should we be worried about seagrass being patchy or contiguous? Does it matter? But what Charlie wanted me to speak about is really this thing, Zen. So Zen is the ZOSTRA, the scientific name for eelgrass, experimental network. And we started participating with Zen like 2010, 2011, so it's, you know, over a decade. And what Zen is it's this global network of people doing research on this seagrass. And if you didn't know, eelgrass, it exists all over the northern hemisphere in temperate and subpolar environments. So it's in the Atlantic on both sides, it's in the Pacific on both sides. And it's kind of an amazing plant because, you know, if you know our local eelgrass, it's, you know, it's yay tall, a nice lush meadow. Well, the same exact plant exists in Japan. And if you've ever been there and seen it, you know it's as tall as this room. Not nearly as dense, but it just gets super tall. And each individual shoot or leaf gets kind of thick. So this plant's kind of this wondrous thing. And so I think the reason this talk to me is interesting is because this network, for lack of a better way of putting it, they don't care about North Carolina, they care about biogeography. I just happen to be the person in North Carolina, and every time a data set would come in, I would sort of make a little mental note, North Carolina's looking a little interesting in the context of all these other places. And so really the only service I'm providing is to maybe shine a light on North Carolina, whereas typically the papers, like the Egghead Science and stuff, is just kind of like global patterns, and we're just one data point. All right, so what is North Carolina seagrass? And there is certainly an eelgrass focus here, but if, again, y'all may know this, it's very hard to find a seagrass meadow out here that's just eelgrass. They do exist, but most of our meadows are mixed. There's going to be some eelgrass, there's going to be some shoal grass, and then again, in any given year or for any given set of months, you'll have a lot of rupia popping up, and then it kind of comes and goes. All right, but so what this figure shows is the map, again, highlights all the places that people have been sampling eelgrass, the same stuff we have here, Atlantic, Pacific. And then this complicated figure on the right, it sort of has two primary axes. And I could sum them up as basically how much biomass of the grass per unit area. So is there a lot of biomass, there's a low biomass. And then the axis on the bottom is how tall the plant gets. So is it short or is it tall? And the green dots are Pacific and the blue dots are Atlantic. And I would say that right here, North Carolina is right smack dab in the middle of Atlantic eelgrass. It looks like the most average grass you could pick. If you want to try to pick the midpoint of all the grasses as a model, that's probably us. So like here is like North Carolina is not a standout, which I find interesting. And then there's everything else I'm going to show you. All right. So all of us from all over the world, we sent in our eelgrass. The people that understand genetics and do that work, they looked at the genetic diversity of the plants from all these places. I don't know if I have a cursor that works. Yeah, I do have a, if you can see that cursor. My little laser pointer. All right, so on the x-axis is just all the different sites. On the y-axis is the genetic diversity that you find all these sites. And the blue area are all the sites in the Atlantic. And the little thing I flagged is North Carolina. North Carolina has the highest genetic diversity within our eelgrass meadows of any place in this ocean basin. And what that probably means is that we have the oldest extant seagrasses of any place in the Atlantic basin. So, you know, every 20 to 100,000 years, we get a glaciation, right? So we've had these glaciation events. And so all this seagrass to our north has gotten covered up in ice, and it goes away. And we're far enough towards the equator where we've not had that. So our grass has been going on for maybe 300,000 years. They think the last time the eelgrass invaded the Atlantic was 300,000 years ago. So our grass meadows have become the anchor that then recolonizes all the other places in the Atlantic over these long time scales. Now, it may be that when you get these glaciation periods that you also get eelgrass in Florida, you know, or wherever. But then it doesn't last as things warm back up. It gets too hot for the eelgrass. Because again, right now, we're at the southern end of where you find it. Eelgrass biologists, this is overstatement, but I'm trying to make a point. They're terrified of wasting disease. These plants, they deal with this protist, pretty sure it's a protist, the little black stuff. This protist is called wasting disease, and it can just eat the plants up. And so we collected a bunch of samples, as did everywhere else, and we sent them in for evidence of how much of this wasting disease is present. And as a for instance, if you know this, if you don't know this, it's kind of a trivia thing, but in the 1930s, the Delmarva Peninsula, they lost all their eelgrass, and they think it was a combination of 3 or 4 hurricanes that came right in succession and this explosion of wasting disease. And so those coastal bays in the Delmarva went a long time with very low eelgrass stands because they all got wiped out by wasting disease. And so all of the little dots represent sampling locations, and the size of the dot tells you how much of this wasting disease they tend to find. And lo and behold, what stands out here is that in North Carolina, the circles are open because we just don't see it. Like, we do not have any wasting disease in the meadows that we sampled. So we've got this seagrass that, for whatever reason, at the moment, is not harboring a lot of this burden that other places are. And so maybe we should feel good about our water quality, generally speaking. And again, these are the true seagrass areas. These are the high salinity waters. This is not the non-true seagrass SAVs that are kind of on the western side of Pamlico Sound and more brackish areas. All right, and then sort of teeing up Madeline, we've had 3 large experiments where we tried to figure out how much eating is taking place in seagrass meadows. Like, how much trophic transfer is there? And when you're thinking about trying to accumulate fishery biomass, we think there's a link here. So these complicated figures, on the vertical axis is latitude, right? So North Pole, South Pole. This is a study that went across multiple types of seagrasses, so not just eelgrass. There is no eelgrass in the southern hemisphere, but they've got their own seagrasses. And then what you're seeing plotted here on this axis, the horizontal axis, is the intensity of feeding, right? And so all the green dots are seagrass meadows from all over the world. And then what you see here in the circle is North Carolina. Like, we are the outlier in the northern hemisphere. There's just so much trophic action happening, of things getting eaten, that it's just an incubator of, sort of moving stuff up a food web. Our North Carolina eelgrass, stuff gets eaten as fast there as other places, non-vegetated areas, right? So typically you think of like maybe stuff gets eaten quicker when it's out in the open. There are some southern hemisphere seagrasses that look on par with North Carolina, but in the northern hemisphere, we're the outlier. This study, don't be bothered by how much data is on here. There's a simple point to be made. This was all about, does it matter what the spatial arrangement of seagrass is? Does it matter if it's contiguous or patchy, or if you sort of chop up the seagrass? The point here is that on the vertical are all these sites, Finland, the Netherlands, Washington State, Oregon, out in California, Virginia. There are data from those sites. And North Carolina has no data. The reason North Carolina has no data is because things get eaten so fast, you can't even measure it. You can't even actually produce the data on the graph. You've got to have something left when you finish the experiment to be able to put a rate. And we can't do that in North Carolina. You'd have to run the experiment for like 1 minute, and everywhere else, is running it for an hour. So stuff's happening here really fast. So separate study, you basically get the same pattern. And then a third study, and I apologize, you won't be able to read this, but I'll read it for you. Totally separate study. If you go around the globe in eelgrass and you look at the diversity of fishes, you might find 4, you might find 6, you might find 8. Well, North Carolina has 25 or 30, of which Madeline may give you some sense of that, probably not the full sense. We certainly have gazillions of pinfish. But we also have all these other species, the flatfishes, snappers, gag, the cyanids, drums and croakers. They come in early in the year typically. So we have relatively high diversity, not to even mention the shrimps and the blue crabs. And what this paper basically says is that if you just correlate the diversity of fish in your seagrass to the consumption rates, you get this R squared value, this relationship value, that in my world is really high. You can predict with some degree of confidence how much consumption you should get based upon the diversity of the critters that are there, as well as the density too. And we are really high in both those. And so Madeline's kind of going to build on this when she gives her talk. So at this point, I'm just going to jump gears really quickly, just to give you some facts and figures that you may be well aware of, but I think it's worth reiterating. I hope I'm not an alarmist. I don't like the idea of being an alarmist. And so when I see the data about seagrass, it's not a heart attack, but it is like high blood pressure or something. Like, I do think we're seeing signs of stress. And so these are data from a Field et al. Publication. This is APNIP, the Albemarle Pamlico National Extreme Partnership, working with folks at DMF, folks at NOAA, some academic researchers. And so on the far left, that's a map of our high salinity seagrass from 2006. And then moving one panel to the right, that's the map from 2013. And everywhere that's colored is still seagrass, but notice how much has gone from green to yellow. So what that means in this mapping exercise is that the meadows have gone from contiguous to patchy. So we're seeing a lot more patchy meadows. And I can't sit here and tell you that I think anybody really knows why that's happening. Did we have a run of storms in that period? Like, what changed? I don't think we really know. I know this same group is getting ready to produce their next updated assessment based upon their last mapping, and I hope y'all all catch that and pay attention to it, because I'm really interested to see what the trends have been even more recently in terms of our coverage. But what their mapping exercise would say is that in 2006, we had maybe a little over 100,000 acres, or 40,000 hectares. And a hectare is, I think, very close to a football field, right? So 40,000 football fields of seagrass. And then by 2013, we were down to like 93 or 94, maybe 95. About a 7 or 8% loss of seagrass. That does not take into account those areas that have gone from contiguous to patchy, right? They're just counting that as seagrass. And so if anything, these numbers may be even a little more concerning. And again, I want to see what their new updates are. So if you ask me, as someone who really does like seagrass, like, is it too early to start acting to try to turn this trend around? Like, no, I don't think so. I mean, this report says we're seeing about 1% a year losses. And that's not terrible, but if I think about 50 years from now, I don't love that pattern. And so just to our north, when the data that you're seeing kind of on the right here, that's a restoration effort that's been going on in those Delmarva coastal bays since the early 2000s, where they've actually been recovering seagrass. That upward trend there is recovered seagrass. And it's scaling to a few thousand hectares, maybe like 10,000 acres of restored seagrass. Different system, maybe different things at play. But they use these eelgrass seeds. And this is a place that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I'm not sure if anybody could recognize it from just this image, but this is the western end of Harker's Island. So it is 2 miles that way, 1.5 miles that way. And you know, this is the seagrass coverage back in the 90s. Really, as late as the early 2000s, you had pretty good seagrass coverage. And then around 2006, 2007, just it went away. 1998, I can tell you with actual data, there used to be 60 scallops per meter squared. That's a meter squared about, right? There were 60 scallops per meter squared in that meadow just like 25 years ago. And now that grass is gone. So I'm really interested in trying to figure out ways to bring some grass back. You've got some people in North Carolina capable of doing this, academics, DMF staff, APNEP's really interested. I'm kind of a low-tech dummy. I want to try some seed-based restoration. So those are seeds in the plants. They're out there right now. I'm going to leave this meeting in a second, change clothes, hop in my boat, and I'm going to go collect these seeds. And I have a bunch of students that are out there. They do a ton of the work. They collect these seeds. All these little black grains of sand, those are the seeds. We're going to hold them for the next 4 or 5 months. And then we'll go deploy them in places where we think we can grow some grass, using those maps about where seagrass has been. And then we're trying to develop sort of, clever ways to plant the seeds. This is this fancy robot that can plant seeds that we're trying to see if it can service us here. But I mean, we would, love everybody's support in terms of trying to bring some of this grass back, because it is kind of slowly going away from us. I think the low salinity SAV, when you talk to those experts, I think that story's even worse. And so, there's a whole nother effort that needs to be done there. All right, so I'm going to wrap up and just say thank you. I'm not sure if we're doing questions or Madeline just comes up now.
So I got one question before she comes up.
Yes, sir.
Or maybe a comment more than a question. So the bed you showed right there off Harker's Island, so the first 2 photos you showed in those years, they were still harvesting scallops out of those areas with scallop drags. Since then, since they closed those areas to scallop drags, because they were afraid they were going to hurt the SAV grass has died. We see the same thing at Topsail Island, where we used to have scallop beds along Banks Channel, and there was a lot of, it was mostly widgeon grass, I think, and some, but that grass was good there. The guys harvested scallops there every year. they said, oh, no, you can't harvest scallops. And I'm a commercial fisherman, have been one since I was 5 years old. And, but, so they said, no, can't harvest scallops there no more, you gotta kill all the eelgrass. And it's always been my stance that it's just like a farm. I also did a lot of farming in my time. And, you know, people have gone to no-till now with farming, but the thing about no-till is the only way to keep your crops growing is you have to treat that soil now that you're not tilling it anymore. And so what we've noticed in the crab fishery is once we quit, like when we say you can't pull a shrimp trawl anymore from marker 90 to marker 125, that bottom in the intercoastal waterway dies. You can't catch crab there no more. You pull the trap up, the trap smells so bad you can't put it on the boat. It's like being in a septic tank. And so what I've noticed is everywhere we've stopped trying to harvest something like scallops because we want to save the eelgrass dies and goes away. And so my question to you is, could it be like a farm where you till and get rid of the bad stuff, and then when you quit tilling, if you don't treat it with chemicals, you don't get rid of the bad stuff no more, and it makes, you know, I don't know that, and I could be, and I'm just I'm a dumb crabber, okay?
Yeah, well, we can talk next. I'm the same.
But I mean, that's something that's probably not been brought up before, and I just.
It has.
It's like,
So,
you know what,
yeah.
it's a good time and a good person to bring this up with.
So this is a spicy meatball. So grass has been here thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
It was certainly able to persist in the absence of human intervention of any type.
Right.
So what I would say from my chair, what would interest me is I hope there's a forum here. I hope there's a way, and this is kind of like a cop-out, but it's also what I believe. Let's test it. That seems testable.
That seems.
It
very
seems like we
tough.
can design the experiment and get the permits and not have someone be furious about, you know, letting someone do something that's a little different than everybody else so that we can test it. That's all I would ask. I certainly agree. I think that sedimentation is a problem in, I might go so far as to say lots of places. Whether that's the problem at Oscar Shoal, I'm probably harder to convince because we can measure what the sediment looks like, and it's not silty stuff, it's sandy stuff. Yeah. But so, in a very collaborative, not snotty way, I would say, if you want to test it, like I'm game, like let's test it. I'm happy to test those things.
I'll work on that for you.
Okay.
I just, that's like to say, go ahead, Tom.
Thank you for the presentation. It's wonderful. I know we're on the boundary line, like for shoal grass and eelgrass, right? Have you seen any migration of those two grasses?
I have not. So here's what I would say we got to be watching for. I don't think we're going to see necessarily the eelgrass roll to the north immediately. What I think we're going to see is we're going to see the bud, the egghead word is phenology. We're going to see the timing of the eelgrass coming and going. That's going to change, I think, first. So the eelgrass here is very seasonal. These seeds are going to germinate December-ish. The plant really hits its growth in March, April. It reproduces, it flowers, it seeds. It keeps growing through June. And then by July, it just dies back. And in fact, you'll be out there in a couple months and you'll see all this beautiful eelgrass floating at the surface. That's how it senesces. It literally just kind of separates at the base of the shoot. So my concern is what happens. My guess is what I'm trying to collect some data on is whether or not that happens on July 1st or June 15th. And then what happens with the fish that have needed it. The seasonality here makes everything really interesting and really hard to study, because I would say that as a for instance, just because I like them so much, the snappers that we do see, you know, we see tons of little snappers in the grass, not red snapper, but all the other snappers like the grass. Yeah. Well, if you look at the data, they are really tightly correlated with the shoal grass. But is that because they like shoal grass, or is that because they get here in August? They come real late when they show up as little guys. So what about those fishes that are really kind of on that border of in the summer? Are they going to lose out if we lose the eelgrass? Or are they just going to hop over to shoalgrass? I don't know that.
That's really interesting. And the reason I ask is just from my anecdotal experience of fishing around here, it seems like the grass thins out a little earlier than it used
And
to.
that would fit theory. There are papers, there's a paper that I don't particularly love, but there's a paper that makes projections that by the end of the century, the lower limit of eelgrass might be like New Jersey. You know, and they've got data, but it's a projection, and all those things have to be revisited to see how good they were projecting. But so to me, the phenology of our grass is what could be changing first.
That's incredible. I mean, just really appreciate this and how you showcased how important it is to our general ecosystem. I mean, looking at federal fisheries management, like these snappers or gag grouper in particular, which have a linkage between their juvenile history and offshore history, you know, we look at that population collapse and we wonder why it's doing a little bit better in North Carolina. It might just be because we have more intact seagrass than, say, South Carolina or Florida does. So, again, thank you.
Go ahead, Willie.
So there's no eelgrass in the ocean. Once you get through the inlet, that's
It's an estuarine.
completely
species, yes,
estuarine.
sir.
Okay.
There are some seagrasses in ocean environments, but not particularly here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I want to thank you. I got to sneak out with your students on Tuesday.
Oh, nice,
and
nice.
volunteer.
So thank you. Yeah.
It was, not only was it a fantastic experience to pick and learn how to find seeds and to find out where the good grass beds are, literally within sight of us, but it was a fantastic way to meet some really, really dedicated young people that have some great projects going on. Like, we had, I think, 4 different candidates out there that were pooling the volunteers to
Thank you.
to fortify their own studies, and they were working. We had Duke and UNC people together.
Yeah.
But-
Cats and dogs living in harmony.
And it was really a fantastic way to learn about what's going on in North Carolina, in our shallow water, in our grass beds. I learned so much. They didn't know that I was a commissioner.
Oh.
They were incredibly gracious with their knowledge. And I don't think it's too late. I would highly encourage everybody on the commission to get out, because it was not only did I learn a lot, but I was also saddened by their fear of what is happening with their potential funding down the road. And especially at a time when we're really beginning to embrace living shorelines and our oyster reefs and our doras, that our SAV studies are coming on strong, and now we're potentially losing money to continue this, and they're all really scared. So thank you, and please thank your students.
Thank you.
It was a great experience.
So I don't give the wrong impression. What we're trying to do with these seeds, like, it's an experiment. What I can tell you is that in every, again, meter squared of seagrass, there's potentially 10,000 seeds being produced. You don't need 10,000 seeds to grow the plants back in that same meter squared. You only need 50 or 60. That's all the room. You know, you can't grow 10,000 plants in that area. So we think there's this resource, this excess resource. The plants are doing it for some reason. Maybe they do it for those hurricane years. And so, but we think some of these areas are seed limited. But I don't want to give you the false impression that, like, this is guaranteed. This is an experiment. And if we figure out those places aren't seed limited, then we get to move on to the next thing. Is it sedimentation, or is it something in the water quality, or is it something else? But so I think there's potential here, but I also don't want to be too cocky or arrogant or come off as too confident. Like, we're just trying to figure out the best mousetrap to slow the declines and even reverse it if possible. And Madeline will do a good job of, I think, showing you why it matters, some numbers to y'all specifically.
Yeah, William. I'll get you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for that presentation. It's really, it's so interesting to hear sort of a global, or at least hemispheric perspective. We're so focused, and maybe not Mr. Roller so much, but I tend to focus so much on what's going on in North Carolina. I'm just curious, what type of organism is wasting disease? Is it fungal or bacterial? Or?
It's a protist.
Protist.
It's a protist.
Protozoa.
It's a protozoa, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like anything else, I assume that the grass is more susceptible when it's stressed to disease?
That makes sense. I'm not an expert in this, but that would, yeah, I would agree.
Are you sure you're not an expert about that?
Pretty sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, really, where are the experts on that? This is truly an annual plant, is that right? It dies
We
back
have a
into-
little bit of a interesting dynamic here. My understanding is, and some folks at NOAA have been doing, our Beaufort lab, they've been doing this research since the 70s. We have some seagrass meadows that don't start seeding until their second year. But increasingly, our meadows, when I go out, almost every meadow I come across is an annual. So it's going to die back, and then it has to come back solely from the seeds. But there are some meadows that the plants don't actually seed until their second year. I think this is worth fact checking, but my understanding is they become more rare in even like the last 3 or 4 decades.
And it seems like that might make seeding more viable because you're not dependent on that root structure and all that.
It certainly makes it more critical that the seeds
Yeah,
do well or do their job.
thanks so much.
Yeah, Doug?
Yeah, thanks. This is fascinating and critically important. So Sarah and I chair the Habitat and Water Quality Standing Advisory Committee, and I chair the CHIP Advisory Committee. And looking into the 2026 revision of the CHIP, having already identified that seagrass is a focus in the previous CHIP, one of the questions becomes, how much do we need? You know, but besides more is better, which is obvious. But and I also helped write the CHIP requirement into the law back in the Marine Fisheries Reform Act. But we always hoped that we would be able to marshal the resources and the science needed to think into the future and to build the science to be able to think into the future about how we assess those questions about how much we need. So if our duty is to make sure that the direct management of the marine resources, including the fish species, is supported by fisheries regulations, and then in partnership with the Environmental Management Commission and the Coastal Resources Commission to have the 3 parts of that stool brought back together. And so one of the questions is, if we were going to look at it spatially or by any metric you think is appropriate, how would we begin to think about what the goal looks like? And I think this is actually true for Spartina and oyster reefs and everything else. You know, how much do we need besides stop loss, stopping the bleeding?
Yeah.
If we were trying to think, and then what would be required? So in a changing coastal system, what would a plan begin to look like for 50 years? I just pulled that out of the air. What don't we know that should be prioritized to be able to understand?
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm pushing you past.
No, this is my attempt to never be asked back. Those are all the big questions, I would say. So, oyster reefs are an essential fish habitat. And North Carolina has lost, the estimates are 90%, 95%, let's say 80%, it doesn't matter, whatever the number is. And I'm gonna look y'all in the eye and say, if any of y'all can tell me how that's affected fish, show me the data. We all have a belief system. It's like a quasi-religion that we can say that that's affected fish. But it happened over 150 years, and we don't have the data, and so we really struggle. I can't sit here and promise you that if we double the amount of grass, we're gonna double your fish. I'd be a liar. And so that's a grand challenge of linking habitat to fish reproduction. Is that I'll raise my hand along probably with most of y'all that these habitats are critically important, but I can't give you a number. There's examples out there of, maybe you lose some grass and then the animals just kind of move over and the densities get higher. It frustrates the dickens out of me. Like, this is like, I guess kind of why I have a job, but it's also like it's just very frustrating. So, you could set the seagrass benchmark maybe at that 2006 survey. You could just arbitrarily pick 100,000 acres. Like, I think that's representative of what North Carolina, you could just say that. And there's no
And just to be clear, that kind of thinking, in my view, is still strong science. It's just a different kind of
Yeah,
science.
and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I suppose, like in a metaphysical way, like it'd be y'all's job to do it, I suppose. Like, are y'all willing, is it possible even, it may not be, but to say, okay, we just lost half the grass, we're gonna reset harvest based upon that lost grass. Would anybody be comfortable doing that? I doubt it. But that's going to change the carrying capacity of the system in a way that it worries me. But I appreciate y'all's position. It's a tough position to be in. So like that's another option is you don't try to bring it back. You just adjust harvest because it's a reality. It's a reality. The other thing I would say is, and I'll get off the soapbox in a second, is this word restoration has, and I'm just kind of a crank, but this word restoration has just gotten to the point where it frustrates me because we're not really even trying to restore. What we're trying to do is maintain. The idea that we can go like do this one time and we're done, I think that, forget about it. We have to invest every year in doing this. It's like my car. I don't change the oil one time and say I restored my car. I got to keep changing the oil. So if you want oysters or you want seagrass, I think the mindset is we just got to get in the habit of doing, it's like your yard. You just got to maintain it. And then you get what you can get.
I don't think that's crazy at all. I think that's exactly right. Anybody that thinks they're going to bring back conditions that used to be here, which is what restoration to some previous condition would require, is nuts. What we're doing is managing for maximum value as we define it in the future at some point. And so that's the point I was trying to get at is with a rapidly changing landscape, coastscape, how do we agree on what that vision looks like? What does success look like? I think if you don't have that driving vision, it's very hard to justify any given investment in water quality improvement and limiting coastal development or directly unlimiting fishing somehow.
I agree with all that.
But we have an opportunity, the point is, with our committees coming up and the 3 commissions in the next years to really think through whether we can and how we would set those kinds of goals. Because we actually don't have them, and it's 20 years later. No, it's more than that. But anyway, we don't have them yet.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all very
good
much. Appreciate it.
presentation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Payne. I'm a PhD candidate in Joel Fodry's lab, so I do a lot of work at UNC-IMS over in Morehead City. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the research I've been doing for my dissertation, looking at the economic value that our seagrasses are contributing to the commercial fisheries here in North Carolina. So before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about ecosystem services. So really simply, ecosystem services are the benefits that we as people can gain from natural ecosystems. Today, we're going to kind of be looking at this service of support or maintenance of our fisheries. So seagrasses provide nursery habitat for many juvenile fish. A lot of these fish will grow up and enter into the commercial fishery if they have an economic value. Some of those fish are caught and again have that market value associated with them. So what I was interested in was looking at what that dollar value is per area of seagrass habitat. So specifically, that dollar value per hectare of seagrass. So North Carolina is a great place to ask this question. As you learned from Joel's presentation, we have a lot of seagrass here, nearly 40,000 hectares. And that's more than all the other East Coast states combined, the exception being Florida. 1 hectare is about 2.5 football fields. So if you want to do the math on how many football fields that is, you're welcome to. And of course, I don't need to reiterate this. We've got a great commercial fishing industry here, also recreational fishing. It's a really important part of North Carolina's economy, and so it makes it a very relevant place to kind of ask this question: what are the seagrass meadows that we have doing to contribute to those fisheries? And our study site takes place in Back Sound, so literally right outside our door. That's where we go out to do our surveys in the seagrass meadows. So I'll be using a well-published and established methodology to answer this question of what that dollar value is per area of seagrass habitat. And there's going to be 4 main components to this methodology. First, I want to know which species have enhanced recruitment from the presence of seagrass. And here we're actually looking at recruitment in an ecological context, so which species, looking at those young of year individuals that are more prevalent in seagrass meadows compared to unstructured mudflat areas. And then I want to know the age class composition of our catch. So again, we're looking at recruitment in that ecological context, so focusing on young of year individuals. So by sampling lengths, I can know what proportion of our catch is actually comprised of those young of year individuals. Third, I'll apply some known growth and mortality rates to look at what that lifetime production for those individuals are over time. And then finally, we can monetize that biomass number. So the next few slides will kind of cover each of these steps in a little bit more detail. So again, to determine recruitment enhancement, we're going to be using trawl surveys in seagrass meadows and also in mudflat areas. That kind of acts as our control habitat. We use a standard otterboard trawl. Joel Fodry and others have been conducting trawling surveys in Back Sound since 2010. So I'm working with a fairly large data set that we can average across years and really get a good sense of the difference in species diversity, but also abundance in our seagrass meadows compared to mudflat areas. And then, so for each trawl, we will count the individuals by species and then also take a total weight of those species. So here you can see just a little bit of kind of what we catch in an average trawl. Overall, across the whole data set, there's nearly 200 unique species, but primarily we catch the species you see on the screen. Those circled at the bottom are going to be the ones that I've included in my economic analysis so far, so you'll see some results on those today. Okay, so looking at which species have enhanced recruitment from seagrass habitat, we're essentially mapping that catch per unit effort or density in our seagrass habitats compared to those mudflat habitats. So that's what we see on these figures here. On the left, we have spot, and on the right, we have gag. So that vertical y-axis is going to be our average catch per unit effort. And then on the bottom, we have our months. We trawl from April through November, because those are typically the months that we have lots of young of years recruiting to our estuaries and our seagrass meadows. So you can see those dotted lines up top. That's from our seagrass habitat. So in most months, that's much higher than that solid bottom line, which represents our mudflat habitat. But what we're really focusing in on here, kind of the months that I've circled, and I'm terming this kind of the month of peak recruitment. So what that means is this is the month that I'm assuming all of the young of year individuals for that species have recruited to the estuary and to the seagrass meadows. So I can kind of use this month as my starting point for the production calculations that I'll get into in a few slides. But because each species has unique life history characteristics, that month is going to vary. So for spot, we find that they recruit earlier in the year in May, whereas gag is a little later in August. So you can see on this figure here, those striped bars are our seagrass habitats. And for many species, those are much higher than those solid black bars, which represents our catch in the mudflat areas. So then again, I'm looking at young of year individuals, so I want to know what our age class composition is of what we're catching. Mostly we're catching age 0 young of year individuals. So in this case for spot, we can even split it down further. In the month of May, we catch mostly age 0, but we also have some 3-month-olds as well, so a little bit older. Okay, so then I'm going to be building these what are called production tables. There's a lot of math here, so I'll try to keep it kind of high level. And if you have specific questions, you can ask me afterward or reach out to me, and I'm happy to go through it in more detail. But essentially, we're going to be using life history characteristics and applying known growth and mortality rates to try to estimate the lifetime production or biomass gained over time for an individual, in this example, age 0 spot. So this top table is factoring in only natural mortality. So if fishing were not occurring, this would be the net production for an individual spot, factoring in only natural mortality. And then we're going to repeat that, adding in that fishing mortality at the age of recruitment to the fishery. So for spot, that's around age 2. And so as you can see, that net production for that individual is a little lower in value because we have that additional mortality being factored in. So to get the total production for each species, we're going to be combining all the elements I just talked about. So we've got that net production for an individual. Again, our example is with age 0 spot. We have that density enhancement, so the number of spot that are present in seagrass meadows that we don't see in those corresponding mudflats. And we can pull that all together to get our total production for age 0 spot. Again, that top value is only with natural mortality factored in. We do the same thing factoring in fishing mortality as well. And so that brings that total production value down a little bit. And so to estimate, the economic value to our commercial fisheries, we want to know what proportion of this biomass is actually being extracted by the fishery. So that's simply going to be the difference between these two numbers. Visually, that's what you see here on this graph. So we have a survivorship curve. That top solid line is going to be our natural mortality only. And again, when you factor in fishing mortality, it obviously brings survivorship down a bit. So that blue area under the curve is going to represent the biomass for each species that's being extracted by the fishery. So then we can multiply that biomass by just average dockside prices to get to that market value. And here we see some of those results for shrimp, spot, blue crab, gag, snapper, flounder, and black sea bass here. So if we add all of this up, that equates to $560 per hectare of seagrass, and that's for each year. So that's currently, if we take that, these are in 2023 US dollars, what we can attribute to our seagrass meadows. I do want to stress this is a conservative estimate, and in the next slide I'll get into a few assumptions that we're making in this methodology that, it's why I think we are probably undervaluing it. But as I mentioned earlier, we've got nearly 40,000 hectares of seagrass in North Carolina, so if you wanted to extrapolate this value out, you would see that we land at about $21 million per hectare of seagrass per year. And that's about nearly 30% of the economic value with the context of the commercial fisheries landings in North Carolina. So again, this $560 per hectare of seagrass is a conservative estimate. For one, we're assuming that our gear, our trawling gear, has perfect catch efficiency, which is not the case. We're likely missing a lot of fish in our catch. We're also not including prey biomass. So Joel talked a little bit about fish consumption rates, and this was something that would be really interesting to get into, but complicates the methodology a lot to look at, we have a lot of fish that aren't economically important by themselves, like pinfish. We catch thousands. I've counted thousands and thousands of pinfish for every trawl that we catch. I come from Texas, so there's pinfish down there, but I was in a landlocked city. Wasn't super familiar with pinfish. I quickly learned that they are everywhere here. They're kind of like the rats of the ocean. But that's not to say that they aren't valuable. They serve as prey for other species that do have economic value. Same with mohara. We catch a lot of mohara. You don't really see a direct market value for those species, but they are ecologically valuable and factoring into those food webs. And so that's a value that we're not capturing in this estimate here. And then again, I want to emphasize I'm only looking at commercial fisheries value. We obviously have a large recreational fishing industry in North Carolina as well, but that's kind of outside of the scope of this current project. And then one last thing, again, bringing it back to that concept of ecosystem services, I'm really only looking at one slice of the pie for seagrass meadows. Seagrasses provide several ecosystem services. So again, these benefits that we kind of see and reap from these seagrass meadows, carbon sequestration, attracting large fauna like sea turtles, and that generates tourism revenue. Also increasing, coastal property values. Having seagrass meadows can improve sediment stabilization, and so can provide some buffer too when we do have these storms come through. So all of these things have indirect values associated with them, but are not included in this particular economic analysis. Okay, with that, I know it was probably kind of a whirlwind of a lot of math, so I'm happy to take any questions that y'all have.
Yes, sir, Tom.
That was incredible. Thank you. I guess I was just surprised about one of your facts. I just want to see if I can get a little information on. So what snapper species specifically are you valuing?
Yeah, so we're valuing mutton, lane, and gray snapper, and I'm taking that's primarily what we catch in our trawl surveys. And as far as like the market value associated with those, I use the kind of other snappers value in the North Carolina Bulletin.
Okay, so when you, other snappers, meaning like just.
So not the red snapper,
Not the non-red snapper.
Yeah.
Because those are pretty small catches in the state of North Carolina.
Okay.
Right? And so, I mean, I'm not going to tell you to go look at that. That may be really hard to source out through the trip ticket program or whatnot. I guess I was just surprised looking at that snapper value for those species per gag grouper, which are very important to our
Right.
commercial and recreational fishery in North Carolina. May that be just because gags are a little less concentrated per hectare?
I would think so, yeah. Yeah, we catch as far, snappers, we definitely see a lot more in our trawling surveys than we do the gag. While we do catch some gag, they're kind of pretty concentrated in a certain area in back sound, and also, the time of year that we're trawling. So I certainly think that would factor in, and which is why, again, this value is conservative in that sense. We're assuming that we have a perfect catch efficiency with our trawling surveys, which is not the case. But that is a good point, and that's where, I should have added a bullet point too. This is kind of a living analysis in the sense that, I'm still working on finalizing details before I submit for publication. So that's certainly something that I will make sure to get in concrete with regard to that snapper value.
Outside of that, though, I mean, those are coast-wide species. We don't know, I mean, a big data need for these federal, grouper snapper species are the link between juveniles in our estuaries and their associated ocean. Like, for example, we've always wondered with gags, are the fish that are on these grass beds, are they ones being caught just in here in North Carolina, or are they going all the way down to Florida as well? We don't understand those migration. We don't understand their movements and relation between the grass, and that was always something that Dr. Jeff Buckle really wanted to study, or still wants to study.
Yes.
I guess my point is that these stocks are all linked, so what we may be producing here may be super important to the mutton fishery in Florida. We don't know, which
Correct,
is super valuable there. So,
Yes, yeah. There is still certainly a lot we don't know, and we're limited by the data that we do have. So, yeah, great point.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Doug.
Can I ask you a totally unfair question?
Sure.
Okay, so you're discounting, I mean it literally, in the non-direct economic value, recognizing the indirect value through food webs and other things.
Correct.
But you can nonetheless estimate the added excess secondary production for all of those species, right? So you would know more or less how much more biomass of, I'm just going to call it prey, is being produced per hectare per year. And then looking at sort of food web averages, one could think about and prey patterns and things like that, more or less, with less certainty, of course. But and I'm not looking for a species by species number, but are the numbers that you're providing half what the total value to the fishery would be, a quarter, a third? I mean, what's your bias about? And I mean, literally, what do you think?
As far as the prey biomass goes, I mean, certainly I think this number would jump up quite a bit if I can try to go back to.
So let me push you quite a bit. Does that mean 10%, 5%? Is this a marginal thing,
I'm
or
always
is there
wary of
I told you it was unfair. Is that hidden effect really big? My guess is it would be.
I would agree with you. Just looking at this figure here, you can see that bottom, I know it's a little small. That bottom bar is our pinfish, and it's like in between 7 and 8,000. Again, we catch a lot of pinfish. So even
That looks like cobia and mackerels and things like that to me.
exactly. So even just looking at, the species that I haven't included in my economic analysis, certainly I tend to look at just their production enhancement from seagrasses. You can, I've talked a little bit, there's some work probably in progress, Joel, and I have talked about this, looking at, yes, you can get those production enhancements from those prey species, and then there's, some programs out there now where you can input those and look at food web modeling and see how that would all play out.
Yeah, like
That's
weighted by trophic rank or something
exactly. Something that would be really interesting to do. It's just my dissertation research took a different direction, and that's probably a whole chapter or two at least to do
like that.
that.
Thank you. This is fabulous.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Oh, okay. Go ahead, William.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's fascinating. Dr. Deaton mentioned that we don't have these kind of data from oyster reefs, and I have seen studies, and I can't recall them in detail right now, about the economic value of oyster reefs. In your review of the literature, and this might not be a fair question either because it's about oyster reefs, but in your review of the literature, are there comparable studies to this, and would your study methods or would your study inform how we might get that kind of data from oyster reefs?
Yes. So I will actually say the study methods I'm using is, again, well-published methodology. The papers that have kind of created and utilized this methodology, they looked at seagrass meadows, they also looked at salt marsh, and then some oyster reefs as well. And so certainly I can't, pull off the top of my head specific to North Carolina, or at least the southeast region for oyster reefs. But our value is comparable in the sense that, we could definitely compare the two. If you had the data there, methodology-wise, we'd be able to compare to see the differences in seagrass versus oyster habitat. I wouldn't say that. I just can't remember region-specific, what those regions were, because I know I've read some papers that looked at oyster reefs specifically. I just don't know if they are. I'm not confident in saying it's specific to North Carolina versus just a broader East Coast region, but it is out there in the literature, yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you all for coming. Yes, sir, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say thank you to Joel and Madeline for coming and presenting. They were excellent presentations. And thank you to Charlie Deaton for coordinating it all.
Thank you.
And also, Madeline, those were beautiful fish photos in there.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I've been asked that we take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish up. All right, let's get back to our seats so we can finish up. So, and Doug's in here, so we're gonna move on with, William, where's William? I thought I saw him. Well, we'll let A start with his issues from, because he had told me he had an issue for commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say that I love the division. I think you are an amazing group of people and do fabulous work. And I understand that understaffing has been an issue for the last several quarters or years or whatnot. What I'm going to talk about or bring up today, I've brought up in the past, is bonita. If you look at the effort shifting and the trends on the bonita fishery from the recreational standpoint, in my opinion, I'm seeing some egregious catches. And you look at social media with the dock shots, the boat shots of 50 to 100 fish, and we've talked about this in the past. That meat doesn't last. It doesn't have a shelf life. I mean, it's 2-3 days maybe. Doesn't freeze well. And when I look back at what our job is here on the commission is to protect and preserve, the resource. And a lot of times I feel like we're reactive when either a certain species is overfished or overfishing is occurring, and we're reactive. And I'd like to see us be more proactive in certain areas. And I did a little bit of research myself. There was a white paper from ASMFC, Nicholas Calabrese or whatnot. If you look in the last 2 or 3 years, I think it was on page 57 of an 88-page paper, the trends are showing that more landings are occurring and harvest of bonita. Also looked at MRIP, and you're seeing the same data on that. And so going back to all this of holding recreational anglers accountable and being responsible, I'd like to see us move forward in making a rulemaking similar to that of sheepshead and the sheepshead language, where we make a bag limit on bonita, because it's not sustainable to catch 50 to 100 fish. It's not going to happen, and we've already seen the effort shifting there. And so I'd like to see us make a rulemaking of a 5-fish bag limit, similar to the sheepshead language, and giving the director the authority to do any other adaptive measures on that.
Yeah, Tom.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Hobgood. I'm going to expand a little bit upon your comments, if that's okay. We passed a motion saying we're interested in starting rulemaking on the species in May of last year. That was a year ago. Again, we know of the extreme short staffing the division has faced in the last year, and we've been we're very understanding of that. Now, the paper that Commissioner Hobgood referenced, which was provided for the ASMSC looking at coastwide landings of bonito, it's very interesting. There's some tidbits you can pull out of it, right? If you look at North Carolina landings in particular, starting about 2020, 2021, we started hitting historic highs. And they have maintained through that last year. And I have been flooded with text messages and phone calls about people showing me all these catches from particularly here to New River Inlet area of people catching 50, 100, 150 fish and killing every single one of them. It is mind-blowing. And what I want to remind people that there's a couple things we think is going on. First of all, Atlantic bonito are clearly doing a little bit better. I mean, landings along most of the East Coast have gone up somewhat in most states. But here in North Carolina, what we're seeing is some fishermen have figured out that if you live chum these fish, you can catch them until you run out of bait. And what I mean is when these fish are here for 4 to 8 weeks every year, if you go out with 100 menhaden, you can probably catch 95 bonito. I have never seen a fish so susceptible to a tactic And it's really kind of concerning for me. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, someone who, bonito are very important for my business, I'm not going to sit here and tell you the fishing's better for them. I think people have gotten a lot better at catching them, and I think they've almost concentrated the population to a degree, and we're all very concerned about what that looks like. We don't know a lot about the life history of this fish. There's very little research on them. We do know in the Mediterranean, there's Atlantic bonito, and there are 5 or 6 different genetic subpopulations that have been studied there. If you look at the coastwide landings in the United States, Florida used to have a large fishery for them. It is now 0. They don't catch them at all. Why? Who knows? But it used to be really big. In North Carolina, we have a very, very small commercial fishery for these. Again, they have a small shelf life. I know they can bring high-value dollars for sushi markets up north at periods of time. In discussions, I think we're all interested, or some of us are interested in pursuing a recreational bag limit. Yeah, and I think the sheep's head language per our last motion is the way to go on that. It just gives the director the authority to put measures in place to manage this fishery if need be. And I think a lot of us would like to start with that rule, but looking at simply just a recreational bag limit at this time period.
All right, so my question to Kat is, and I know it just so happens that I was on the commission when they did the sheep's head before. So this is a fish we don't have anything on, pretty much. Do you have proclamation authority to do that under the guidelines of this for a recreational bag limit?
No, sir, not at the time, but the direction from the commission in May of last year was for us to look at or draft an issue paper that would, similar to Sheep's Head, the Sheep's Head issue paper drafted rule text that gives the director proclamation authority of means, method, size, all that, all those items, and that was the direction from the commission, and we can do that as well for Atlantic bonito.
Is that something we could possibly see in August, or are we looking at November? Are we looking at next February? What kind of timeline would we be looking at?
We could possibly see it in August. You can't quote me on that. We're working on it for August, but I'm not 100% that we'll have it in August, but that is possible. November at the latest.
These are questions that I see Tom ready to ask, so I was go ahead and ask them first.
You're very good at reading my mind, Chairman.
So Jackie Deegan is a new biologist on staff at the division, and she has been the lucky person assigned Atlantic bonito, which she pretty much got assigned as soon as she walked in the door, because this has been on our list of things to do. We just didn't have the personnel to do said thing.
And so I'm going to ask Tom a question. So pretty much now, that fishery has passed us more or less the bulk of that fish. Because I'm like you, I've seen all that on Facebook too, and it's kind of hard to look at 100 of them laying on a dock going, what are they going to do with them? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that fishery has passed us by this year. I'm sure there's still some out there. But there's some interesting some other interesting conversations that have happened. At the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, the federal council, we have a mackerel advisory panel, which manages king and Spanish mackerel. And it's well represented mostly by Florida and North Carolina fishermen. And I chair that committee, and what was really interesting is at the last meeting, a commercial fisherman from the Sneads Ferry area, I don't know him very well, but he came on there and said, I am really worried about Atlantic bonito, and I think the council should manage them. Personally, in discussion with that council, that's probably not the best place for them because they're mostly found from Rhode Island and North Carolina. But there was some really elaborate conversation from the commercial sector as well as the recreational sector there. And they did pass a motion, so that was very organic, and I was very surprised to see that. But this seems to be coming from all elements of the fishing industry in this area because of the behavior that we're seeing. Because people aren't saying that the fishing is necessarily that much better. We're just seeing some really different fishing methods that have us really concerned. So I guess my question here is, a lot of us were interested in moving forward with this, and, our original motion was just to use the sheep's head language because it's very basic, right? Which I know in discussion here, we're interested in a recreational bag limit. However, recognizing the need that maybe you'll need to do something in the future, whether it was a size limit or a commercial trip limit, or who knows what, or I don't know, circle hook requirement. I'm just kidding. I don't know what it is, but it could be potentially anything in there that could be done by that. So,
Yes, sir.
I would be concerned about going forward with this at the moment without a white paper or without any information, scientific information yet coming from North Carolina, because we don't understand the regional differences. I'm concerned that basing decision-making on social media posts, science, we have so much frustration here dealing with science, old science, incomplete science. So the idea that we're basing regulation on social media posts is very concerning to me. And also, too, I think that maybe this doesn't, yes, this could be potentially a live bait issue, but what other underlying issues could be affecting the bonita in this area? Is it spot lock trolling motors that could also be the problem? I just know that bonita fishing in my region it's not live bait based. It's a trolling bite. It's just about past us now too, and everybody's reporting a larger body of bonita that they've seen in the past. So are we maybe basing decisions on an uptick in the species? I just think there's just not enough that we know to be able to ask that out of people, especially without addressing the stakeholders.
So before you reply to that, and my thought process would be if there's a chance that we could get some kind of paper in August, and I'm not holding your feet to the fire like you said, and this fishery has kind of passed us at this time, is that something that we could get more information on? Even if we don't get a complete paper, if we could get some information in August, would we be better suited? Go ahead, Kat.
So just to make sure everybody understands, and staff has teams and me about different things, and I think we can bring you some information in August, but just for clarification, rulemaking cycle won't start until May of 2026. So we've got some time to work on the information and get into rule drafted exactly like you want to, but it's May 2026 when rulemaking starts, the process of rulemaking for the 26-27 rulemaking cycle. So the piece of this is that the rulemaking piece does take a long time, and to Commissioner Gardner's point about the data, that was the first thing that we were planning to bring to the body was the data, what little data that we do have. But we do have some data to put that together and bring it and let you have a look at it, and then we can talk about how you want it to look. But the Broad Proclamation Authority, that is under the sheep's head rule, that is the direction that we got from the commission, and we're more than happy to draft something along that line.
Yes, Tom.
So to reply to Commissioner Gardner's comments, we're not going to get scientific information on this fish. There isn't much. I mean, I participated in a telemetry tagging study this spring with the Buckle Lab at NC State, as well as the Nature Conservancy. We telemetry tagged 25 bonito. We're not going to get information from them from years. We're only going to get some basic, movements of those fisheries. What we're looking at is concerning landing trends. We're seeing big behavioral shifts, and we're seeing a lot of waste. And if we're going to sit here, just like our false albacore thing, say, oh, we want to wait until we get a stock assessment, and we want to wait until we get, really large population dynamics. We're not going to get those. And in the odds of being proactive, at some point in the lack of resources that we have, we need to look at trends and figure out if we want to take some action there. And that's why we think looking at a recreational bag limit is a very proactive and responsible thing to do for what is a very important fishery, and a fishery that's growing in importance to recreational fishermen in North Carolina because of the lack of access to other fisheries in recent years. We've lost a lot of fisheries, and quite frankly, I can't afford to lose any more. And I know a lot of other people feel the same way. And I mean, to go back to, I think the concern we have here is every month that we delay, I'm going to use the word delay, that's not the right word, but every month that goes by without us having a look at this, it just delays that rule making. So if we wait until August or November, I mean, we're looking at 2028, maybe, before we get a rule into place. And that's concerning to me because that's several more seasons of potentially impactful behavior on this population.
So I got one question for Tom. So the way you did this with albacore, okay, and you'd be the one that knows best. from the time you asked for that to the time you got your rule sent, what was that time period? Because I don't know, and I would like to know what that time period was.
I would say it was almost 2 years. Now, I don't think that we can compare this to albacore. The
Okay.
division came up with a fascinating and really interesting rule to manage a fishery that's very different. Albacore is, it's a catch and release fishery, it's some bait. There is a growing commercial component because of the way they can be targeted. They're here for longer periods of time. I mean, when you look at this fishery, Bonito, I think the last year commercial landings I looked at was 2022 or one. It was like 15,000 pounds, but the recreational poundage was 120, 130,000 pounds. And growing, right? Like it's growing considerably. People harvest these to eat them, right? And what we're seeing by not just a few people, but a lot of people are people keeping like 100+ fish. I mean, that is extraordinarily wasteful.
All right, thank you for that. And go ahead.
I just want to make one comment on it's not just social media. There's not a lot of data out there, and I did try to find as much as I could and found that paper, and it does show data and shows landings in a trend that the last 2 or 3 years has jumped up dramatically on landings and whatnot. And then when Tom brings up that Atlantic states have been talking about this for a while too. We're all North Carolinians here, and I think that you foresee a problem and something that cannot sustain harvesting 50 to 100 fish. And as being a North Carolinian and other states are already looking at this, I like being the leader and taking charge and doing something proactive for a fishery that, the sustainability is not going to be able to occur at these levels. So,
Okay, Kat.
Just back to the schedule and effective rule date. So Catherine is telling me April the 1st of 2027 with the path that we're on right now. And that is if there are no letters of objection, and that might, if there are, then that might extend it a couple of months. But no, that would extend it, if there are 10 letters, June-ish of 2028. So 27, April 27, 28, depending on if there are any letters of objections to the rule, proposed rule.
So let me ask A one question. So what kind of motion were you thinking about putting forward?
Just a simple recreational bag limit.
So then I'm gonna look over, I'm
It
trying
doesn't
to
mean,
see.
it doesn't mean that,
I'm just trying to see what we can do.
There's no vessel limit. You can still go catch,
So
a boat
so
that
now I'm
goes
gonna
catch.
look to my buddy right here and say, if, let's say A and Tom came up with a recreational bag limit motion, is that something we entertain even we know Kathy cannot do it by proclamation? What's my, I need somebody a lot smarter than a dumb crabber, okay?
I'm not sure you're gonna find that in a lawyer, but we can give it a shot. As you're aware, the commission has broad authority to set time, manner, place, size limits, restrictions, gear restrictions, limits, otherwise, on species within your jurisdiction, marine and estuarine resources. So I'm also aware that the commission has at various times moved forward with setting those limits on species without it being based on through the F&P process, which is in fact the primary method for regulating marine species in North Carolina. You start with the fisheries management plan process. So I say all of that both to show that I am a lawyer and to say, because we get, words matter, and I'm going to add some, even if they don't. But that is the primary process, but it doesn't require you to only have that process. If a species is regulated by an F&P, that's the process you have to do it. If it's not, like sheep's head, then you can set your own limits for that. The proclamation authority gets a little bit tricky based on your rules and your requirements for how proclamations are typically issued or what the factors are to be issued, but you can set that limit and impose conditions or provide conditions under which a proclamation can be issued. You just did that with Little Tuning, which Jesse tells me is the proper way to say false albacore.
All right, so my next question to you is, so if, let's say Tom or A or whoever came up with a motion to set recreational bag limits, and it passed while they were doing their thing, is that a legally binding?
That would begin the rulemaking process while they were looking at
Okay,
these things.
okay.
That
All right,
that would be,
I'm
that
just
would.
trying, because I don't know, and I'm just trying to understand what.
I would say that would reset the baseline for proceeding with it, right? Because your baseline under the motion that was made in 2024 was to look at it in that particular manner.
Okay.
And so if you specify a certain bag limit, you're clarifying and narrowing the scope of that to say, these are the numbers we won't set.
Okay, and so I'm gonna give Tom that look, and then I'm gonna call on him.
So the question I have is, the way in which I wanted to proceed with this, regardless of whether it was here or a future meeting, would to be start rulemaking using the sheep's head language, rule language, for Atlantic Bonito, looking at a bag limit that we were thinking like 5 fish per person would be reasonable. We're not going to be able to look at MREP data and get a really good idea of what a bag could be, because we're not trying to reduce harvest or like to a specific level or anything. We're just trying to put a reasonable bag limit. And I would remind everybody that Massachusetts just put a 5-fish bag limit on this fishery due to egregious behavior and no scientific information available on important species.
And that's a recreational bag limit,
Commercial too.
5 fish commercial too.
Uh-huh. And I don't think we want that in North Carolina. No, I don't. So
No, I'm talking about what you were proposing.
what I'm proposing is like 5 fish recreational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be
And
consistent
then
with
when
the motion.
and then later, when they came up with the data, if we decided at that time something needed to be commercial, we could, like you did with albacore.
Absolutely. And I don't personally think at this point we're going to see that, but I mean, you never know. The data could show otherwise.
So what you're looking at right now is you would make a motion for a 5-fish recreational bag limit, and that would
Using
start the process.
start the process using the sheep's head rule language, which is very basic if someone wants to tee it up. I'm sorry, Jesse. That I wasn't voluntolding you to do that. So.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
while we're waiting for Jesse, I pulled up the MRIP data. And in 2015, I'm just going to run through like 5-6 years, 7-8 years. 2015, the harvest, recreational harvest was roughly 17,000 pounds, trending to 12,500 in 2018, skipping ahead a few years. 2021, 21,000 pounds, 22, 12,000, 23, 73,000, and 24, 62,000. There are some 3 years in there where the percent standard error is greater than 50%, which isn't reported.
That's a
or
pretty
reported.
big jump.
It's a clear trend
Yeah.
of increased harvest.
So let's let Doug talk, and then I'm gonna come back and see if you want to make a motion to try to get.
Just to
this
be
started.
clear, I'm fairly uncomfortable as a scientist not having seen what little we have, and I would like to see that on the record here, and that's why I'm way more comfortable having a white paper, even if it's an abbreviated white paper, brought to us with a recommendation. I think it would gird our loins better for surviving any contest that might happen in the General Assembly about due process or under the APA, or, I mean, I just think we have some, so don't get me wrong, I'm going to vote for this when it comes. I'm not sure, today just strikes me as being, I don't feel like I have what I need to vote for something today.
And what I understood from Philip was that if they did it for a recreational 5-fish bag limit or whatever, that just means the process starts from today, not 3 months from now or 6 months from now. I think that's the way I understood it. Go ahead, Tom.
So, may I speak?
Yeah, oh, yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Chairman. Yeah, that's kind of my next question was that, is if we started rulemaking today and we get an abbreviated white paper, could we make changes potentially during the rulemaking process?
We can always make changes.
So I'm just trying to
Until we make
start
a
the
rule.
process because of trends that we're seeing
Yep.
in this time frame, and understanding that we're going to need to see data to make further decisions looking forward. I just want to start the process with this rulemaking cycle if possible.
And then I would look at you and say, do you want to make a motion to start that process? And then we'll, yes, you sure can.
Thank you so much. I'm not 100% sure that I understand what an additional motion from the commission would do. Based on the motion that they made in May of 2024, our draft issue paper would look similar to that, and we could also include some specificity in that for a recreational bag limit. Are you suggesting that you want to make another motion to that just because of the 5-fish suggestion, or can I just hear that and?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's up to you and the members if they want to specify the inclusion of a 5-fish bag limit, or if they want to provide clarification without having to go through the formal motion process.
Well, I'm going to let
It's up
Tom,
to-
I'm going to let Tom make
it's up
that
to-
decision.
So that's not the question I really have. Like, I mean, that's a basic recommendation. The division came back with something else. I'm all ears, right? I guess my question is can we start the rulemaking process now?
So you are starting the rulemaking process now, in that you're crafting the proposed rule language for your consideration that would need to be accompanied by the regular documents that would then go out to public comment. What I hear is that could happen as early as August, but it certainly doesn't conclude in August. So August would be at earliest your first vote, assuming you have all the documents, to publish the notice of text like you have for everything, all the other rules that you've adopted. You did that just yesterday. But that would, so it depends on what you consider to be the formal start of the rulemaking process. Is it the work that's done to present you draft language? Or is it your action to approve draft language? But what I understood the director to be asking was, does the request today or information today pose any additional need for a further clarification of the existing motion? In other words, do you want to specify today by motion that in addition to the language that you already passed, you want to specify that you're looking for a 5-fish bag limit? Or do you just want the director to understand that that's what you're thinking, and she can come back with 5 or 10 or 2.5, I suppose? But-
So, Mike, this is going to be a legal question. So
Sure.
if we pursue, you give good looks, Philip. So I guess my clarification here is if we started the rulemaking process today, I guess that information provided by us by the commission would be detrimental to the rulemaking process. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
He's trying to figure out if it's going to start
Today.
now, 3 months from now, 6 months from
Yeah.
now.
We're-
What has he got
Right.
to do to
So
start
that-
it today?
That's my question. Thank you, Sammy.
So that's why I asked you, or that's what I said earlier, is it depends on what you consider the start, what you personally consider the start of rulemaking, because what I would consider the start of rulemaking is the commission's action to vote to publish the notice of text along with the required documents, because that gives notice to the public that this is what we're considering, here's when we're going to have a public hearing, here's how you can submit comments. That, to me,
Is the start of
is the formal start of rulemaking. But as I mentioned yesterday, there is so much work that goes into it to get to that point. And I would say that you've already begun informally the rulemaking process because you've asked staff to come back with a recommendation for rule language. You just haven't said, yeah, this is the one we want to send out to public
And to
comment.
do that, we probably need the information
That's
from
right.
the
That's right.
division.
And
So you could
I'm
not-
going to let Catherine speak for a minute, too.
Well-
After you get done, I'm going to let you finish,
Okay.
but then Catherine's going to be the next one to speak.
But you could not today say, publish the notice of text, because you don't have the text itself, and you certainly don't have the required documents that are necessary to publish that notice. So you're in the rulemaking posture, you're on deck, you just haven't gotten to the plate yet.
So let's let Catherine tell us, because it looks like she's got something that she wants to say.
I have a few thoughts that may help.
Thank you.
Good morning. So Commissioner Roller, Commissioner Hobgood, thank you for your continued interest in this topic. We have carried forward the motion that the commission made last May at each of our wrap-up meetings when we get back from these business meetings. We have not forgotten the task. Jackie started recently. She and I had a conversation yesterday to continue explaining to our new staffer what the processes are. Her immediate group had already begun the process. So Jackie's first week, we essentially started working on what will be an issue paper. We had a fairly lengthy conversation yesterday about how to get this done and get right on it. One distinction that I think is worth the commission's time is the fishery management plan process that Philip was already talking about versus something not covered by a fishery management plan. Normally, there's a lot of vetting going on by us bringing the pieces of a fishery management plan to you along the way, working with the FMP Advisory Committee, getting public input. And that process doesn't happen if there's not an FMP, right? And so that process happens here. And what we would like to do is pull together whatever data there is so that we can bring that to you and start forming what the rule language could look like if it's anything beyond what you see on the screen for sheep's head. For example, in the false albacore rule, there's a ceiling that's set. So it's proclamation authority, but not to exceed this bag, this size, this trip limit. Not trying to complicate it, but we certainly could pose a couple of options. The more things that can be in permanent rule, the better, just simply because if it's not variable, for example, 5-fish bag limit, if you don't want that to be less than that, we can put that piece in permanent rule and then extend proclamation authority to, because you can't anticipate what everything would be in the future. So we can bring just a couple of simple options and bounce those off of you at your August meeting before we put ink to it, finish the paper. Bring that to you in November. If you like what you see and you pick your preferred management option, then we've got the time to prepare the fiscal analysis document and get that approved through OSBM, which is required. Those are the documents Philip's talking about. So we can get this done and be on track to begin rulemaking in May and take the time it deserves to bring whatever data we have. So the process has started. We hear you, as Kat said, with the 5-fish rec bag limit. And we're already working on it. So if that's something, as Philip will direct you as far as putting that on the record or not, it's not necessary from my standpoint. We heard you and we're already working based on the motion last year.
Okay, and so my question, one more question I have, and this may take into account what you want for Philip, Catherine, Kat, whoever. So my telepathic thing with Tom here, I think what his thought process is right now, is there any way that he could have that bag limit put on those fish before April of next year?
No.
How did I do, Tom? Was that pretty?
Yeah, because of the season,
said you didn't have that
the
authority,
season
sorry.
for that fish. Is that what you're getting at, the time of year that it's peaking?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just next year, but the farther it moves down, then we're moving past the next year. So we're just trying to figure out when can we get this in place sooner than later. And so, the false albacore rule was really great work by you guys. I don't necessarily think we need those depth of options here. That's why we looked at the sheep's head language, because our discussion here at the commission was, hey, let's just do a bag limit. And if the fishery changes in the future, at least there's some ways for the commission and the director in order to maybe say, oh my gosh, we need a size limit or a commercial trip limit or something like that. I guess I would be more comfortable with this as if we were going to see something in August. That's my takeaway.
Yes, sir.
Last comment, and then I won't say any more. First, I apologize. I was not trying to stir the pot, and I agree with Doug and Sarah that, to get a white paper, get some data, and let everybody look at it. I also agree with Philip to allow the public to have a chance to respond and whatnot. My whole point was that the effort, the trends are accelerating at a pace that I don't think is sustainable. And we seem to be kicking the can down the road, and I'm trying to prevent the can not to be kicked down the road any longer than it has to.
And so my thing to Kat is, Kat's already said that she will try to bring us something in August. If not, it'll be November. And that's as fast as we can hope for, I would think, because that's our next meeting.
Yes, sir. And it's not a kicking the can down the road, because trust me, I know exactly what that looks like. This is the rulemaking process, and this is the only option that you have.
Yeah. And
So there's nothing else that we can do. I mean, that's just really the bottom line of this.
Like I say, I've played, I mean, I've been dumb about it, and I've learned a lot, and that's why I kept asking how soon we could do it. And so I don't think we need a motion on anything, because we're already there, right? And y'all all know that he
Except I
wants
think
a
it's,
five-fish
I hear the
recreation
sense of the commission that we want to act in August, not November. And
Well, if they got to get the data together, though, so.
I'm just saying,
I understand that.
because there
I
ain't
mean,
that much data.
True. Again, I will say, last May, when y'all asked for this, we've talked about this every time. We've had 19 vacancies in that section. I cannot be more clear about this. And, you know, as I pointed out, Jackie's new on our staff, and she got assigned Atlantic Bonita, and we are working on it. And we hope to have it together for you as soon as we can.
Lucky Jackie. Okay, so I guess we've done what we can do there. We all tried to do the best we could on that. And so with that, we'll go to Jesse for assignments. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate a side conversation I've had with the director and Jesse of some concerns from the commercial industry about the new Otis and some of the messaging that I guess it's part of a requirement of the ITP and the permit to be just to be proactive and sort of send reminders out to the permit holders that, these are the requirements of the permit that we, report to the division by a certain time of said week that fishing, they intended to fish the following week. And so I'm not going to say it's a burden to the fishermen, but it's a little overwhelming, I think, that messaging continues outside of fishing seasons and seasons that they're able to go fishing. And so I just wanted the members of the commission to hear a part of this, that there was a concern and that I have attempted to start addressing this with the director to try to somehow create not so much as an opt-out, but to turn the messaging off during times of the year that the messaging might not be necessary, and allow the fishermen to have a way to do that. This is not like some serious issue. I just kind of wanted it to be known that I had this conversation and that this was a concern from the commercial industry. And it's not like a don't message me type of thing. It's just a how can we do better at turning messaging on and off at times when it's needed and not needed. And so I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it. I just have asked the director to look into it, and I just wanted to follow up on that.
So can I say one thing on that, Kat? Because I had to get the set net permit, which I don't set net, to do the thing for Barbie, before they started this. And so my name was still on that list, and you're right, there's 3 texts, 3 calls. So I found through, and I won't say who or how or what, since I don't set net, I've blocked that number. I don't have to worry about it no more. But if I did set net and I wasn't going to set net for 2 months, I'd block the number for 2 months, cut it back on, then it'll start coming back to me again and they won't have to put up with it if they won't have to put up with it, because I don't see how they could stop sending that out, because if you've got that permit, they've got to ask you, because if they don't ask you, and then you go do it and you go, well, nobody called and asked me, it's the other side of the coin. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just further comment on that. And so we, through a conversation, I said it wasn't necessary, didn't make sense to turn messaging off to the fishermen, but to maybe add to the messaging that there is a way to opt out. And so, like I said, I'm just following up, and we had a pretty 10 or 15 minutes on this one little subject, and we went back and forth, and so I think I'm just looking for a little feedback on our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Blanton. And I, going around when we were talking about Otis, and after that got going a little bit, I had gotten some calls and had some discussion with fishermen too, complaining about the number of times per day that they were contacted. So I totally understand what you're saying. And I talked to Fisheries management staff about this after we met and talked about this. And my understanding is that you can opt out. You have three methods. You have phone, you have text, you have phone calls, text messages, and emails, and you can opt out of two of the three. And staff is shaking their head, that's correct. So that is my understanding right now. We did, I think Jason and I did have a discussion about, it's hard to Sammy's point, it's hard to really turn it off, because then, but I think there might be some other conversations that we can have about, are there any additional things that we could do, to your point, to try to get folks to say, okay, I'm opting out, but that's, you talked about this being on the fishermen as part of their responsibility. So we can talk a little bit more about that, but I think for right now, and I think we also talked about messaging this, the staff to message this to the fishermen that they can opt out, and they can only get this by email. The one caution of that is that they can also then only, if they opt out of phone and text, then they say, okay, I want to get my information by email, then that is the method which when they also would get their trip scheduled and whatnot. So that would be what they're stuck with, would be only email. So we're talking about that and looking into it, but we'll see what happens down the road.
So, and the problem that the guys my way had that complained about it, and my personal problem, which I don't use set nets, and so, but I got to thinking when I was going to try to opt out all of it, and like Kat said, once you opt out of it, you're out of it. But when I talk to people, they said, well, if you block that number, if you decide to go, you unblock it, it's coming to you every time. You're not getting it. But when you cut it back on, it's still coming to you every time. So it's kind of rude to do it that way, but.
And I hate to say this, but for the chairman, but I don't think we would recommend to fishermen to block the number. That would be like Plan F.
Right. This is just a conversation that I started. I wanted the members to know this is a conversation I started, and that's just all of this it really is. And I'm not looking for a definitive answer right now. I just wanted them to know that, hey, one of the concerns from the industry was that from Otis was like the robust amount of messaging that they get, even outside of clearly defined fishing seasons, and that,
They do a great job.
Yeah, I mean,
3 calls and 3 texts.
They make good and sure.
Yeah.
I can promise you this, as being on this list as well and getting the same amount of messaging.
Don't miss.
They will not let up on the amount of
No, sir.
messaging they give to make good and sure those trips are scheduled.
The
And
best
so
I've ever seen.
I
can tell you
appreciate that, but however, that might be just a tad bit much outside of current, or outside of, fishing seasons that are allowed. And so that's all.
Well, I say this with all due respect, but y'all asked for that.
I know. However, I wish there was just a way to cleanly be like, all right, well, it's outside of set net season, and I wish I could just push a button and be like, opt out until this day, and then start sending me a message back. And so anyway, any way that could be some ideas brought and helped upon of the massive amount of messaging, that's just one of the commercial industry concerns. Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir,
Mr.
William.
Chairman, I'm sorry. I do have a couple of issues. I'll try to be very quick. Regarding the DORAs, I would like to ask the division to consider monitoring how the DORAs might be monitored, how we might monitor the growth, the vertical growth of oyster reefs in the deep water oyster recovery areas, either, by sonar or direct observation or whatever the case might be. I'm just wondering what our options might be for monitoring that growth, and maybe if we just the briefest presentation, or if you have ideas now, I'm all ears.
So I don't have any ideas right, I'm sure staff does, I don't have any ideas right now, but staff is currently working on what their monitoring plan would be for the doors.
Fantastic. I would look forward to hearing about that. That would be terrific. And also, I talked to Colonel Witten a little bit about marking the DORAs. And obviously, trawlers don't want to run over oyster rock, and there are and the Colonel let me know that there are existing markers in place, but they're looking at adding additional markers as necessary. And I'd like to hear about that and maybe see some visualization, maybe some pictures of that. And also wondering if we should consider, or if the division would consider whether there should be restrictions on anchoring in the DORAs. The Colonel pointed out to me, we were talking about why would someone anchor way out there, but he pointed out the fishermen would anchor out there, but to fish on a reef. And it might take a reef 10 years to grow 4 feet, and one guy drags his 12-pound anchor across it, knocks it down. So, maybe we should consider restricting anchoring in those areas. I would like to hear a report on that, or just some information on that, what the viability of that is and the advisability of that might be. And then quickly on, I would love to hear a presentation on fishery independent data collection that the division does, particularly on trawling. It may have been that I may not be aware of a presentation that's been done recently, and if that's the case, I'm perfectly willing for Jesse to refer me to videos like he does all the time.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner Service. We do try to, every so often, give a presentation on our independent and dependent sampling, and we actually had a discussion about this quite a bit yesterday after the discussion on blue crab and our sampling, and talking to some of the crabbers after the meeting. And so we were planning on trying to do something with that pretty soon to try and, just to remind folks about how we do sampling, why we do it a certain way is completely different than fishing. Fishing and sampling are two different things, and so I appreciate that. We'll certainly work on something for the future.
And I think the presentations that have been done in past that are fishery specific about sampling, for example, crabs, have been very good. We've gotten very good information, had great discussions. But I'd like to hear sort of the overall, independent of species, and maybe if it's possible, a little bit about maybe the possibility of a crab pot sample for the blue crabs, or why it may or may not be viable or advisable or whatever, or what it might look like would be interesting if possible. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Jesse, how about assignments? And we'll adjourn this thing.
That sounds good to me, Chairman. Can I say 2 things before I get to that?
No.
Darn. Wow. The first one is I'm impressed with you for knowing how to block a phone number. That's awesome. And also, Jackie,
I got somebody to do it for me.
I just want to say how awesome Jackie is. She was actually my marine biology teacher about over 15 years ago now, and she was the most fantastic teacher I've ever had. So I'm really excited to have her working for the division. Although she did tell me the other day that she thought I was a snot-nosed little brat when I was in school, so her judgment might not be great.
But did she say she changed her opinion since then? Okay.
All right. So as far as action items from this meeting or requests from this meeting, the division will be sending some publications regarding striped bass to the commissioners with some information that they might find useful for the upcoming discussion in August. We'll be bringing back an issue paper regarding rule language for Atlantic bonito. as early as we can. And we also will kind of explore some ways we can reduce the messaging burden on fishermen regarding Otis. There was also a request, which we just heard, for information on plans for monitoring the deepwater oyster recovery areas. And included in that information would potentially be some information on how we mark the Doras, as well as maybe the potential for having some restrictions on anchoring or other gear that might impact the Doras. All right, so your next meeting is in August in Raleigh. It's at the Hilton Raleigh North Hills. It's August 20th is when that meeting begins. At that meeting, you're scheduled to vote on final adoption of Amendment 4 to the Southern Flounder FMP. We'll be coming back to the commission with a presentation on the results of the striped bass data analysis in the Tarpam and Neuse Rivers and conclusions about whether the stocks are self-sustaining. And there was also discussion at this meeting about having a time slot in the August meeting for discussing ideas for Southern Flounder management with Amendment 5. And I can talk a lot more if you want me to, Chairman.
No, sir, I do not. Absolutely not. Okay, with that, we're going to adjourn the meeting, and I guess I need to, I never hit it to open it. I don't know why I got to hit it to close it, but all right. Thank you, guys.